My name's Jo. Thank you for coming. And my sincere wish for this afternoon is that I can offer you something that is of use to you. And my trust is that if there's anything not of use to you, that you can leave it here. I'm not claiming to be the authority on this, but I have a lot of experience which gives me ideas that I want to share, especially after being part of groups and Facebook groups and conversations since Extinction Rebellion started, and there's been a lot of huge response, interest and panic in the face of that. And I was part of conversations about activism and how we involve children or don't involve children, worries about the future, how do we protect our children, how do we keep going every day now with a new fear that we found from being better informed about the situation of climate chaos. And so the talk I want to do today is the structure is I've got 4 main things I want to talk about. And my idea is that I'll talk a little bit about each one, and after each short section there'll be a time for a conversation in between you, so that you get to meet some people here, think about the things I've said, think about where that lands with you. So the 4 sections are, one is the neurobiology of child development, which sounds like a strange link to climate change, but I think it is foundational information that we need in order to know what children need most, but also what we all need most, and how parents can resource themselves and be resourced in the community to offer that. So I'm going to say something about how we physically tick based on information research that's coming from neuroscience, specifically from interpersonal neurobiology. And I can give you sources of references and things if you want to look stuff up afterwards. It's a very exciting field of learning. So the second section is about communicating with children about climate change. How do we actually talk to, explain things, and when do we not do that? And I'm going to talk about the different age stages that we might look at to help guide our feelings there, or guide our actions there. The third section is about how do we involve the children in activism, when do we not involve them in activism, and how do we plan activism that is inclusive and friendly towards children, which helps grow their capacity to stand up and have their voice heard and doesn't completely freak them out. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. And then the 4th section is about how parenting our children, and when I say parenting actually, I mean as a community parenting our children, how we bring our children up, can be activism in itself. And I want to say very strongly that I believe that we need to be bringing children up in a different way from our mainstream culture if we want the world to be different in the future, or if we want to equip them to deal with the world that is going to be different in the future. So those are the 4 sections, and I'm pretty excited about all of those actually. So I hope that I'm going to get you very excited about all of those. So the first section then, neurobiology of child development. Yes, the mic, yeah, thank you. I've put a picture of a chimp here with her baby, because this is old stuff. We have been evolving, as Homo sapiens branch of humans has been evolving for something like 200,000 years. And for many hundreds of thousands, in fact millions of years before that, primates have been evolving to care for their young, to survive through strong early attachments. And maybe you've come across attachment theory, but the current brain research is really confirming a lot of what we've thought for a long time and adding more. It's only been in the last 10,000 years that agriculture started, and that humans stopped being, well, some humans anyway, stopped being nomadic hunter-gatherers. And so when we're thinking about our biology, it's really helpful to remember that that is ancient. So I'll tell you a bit about what that means. So the biggest learning out of interpersonal neurobiology is that it is all about connection. We grow and evolve and function through our relationships. It's so clear, not just a spiritual philosophy, it's a scientific fact now, that we do not exist in isolation. In fact, Daniel Siegel said that the most dangerous idea in our time is the idea that humans are separate and individual. We are so literally, in the way that we grow our brains and nervous systems and the way that we function every day, we are literally social animals. And that has some very big opportunities and it has some very big vulnerabilities. So I want to say something about particularly the neurobiology of safety and of fear and trauma. How do we create an environment that promotes resilience? I'm going to use that word resilience a fair bit today, so I just want to clarify that what I mean by that is the ability to thrive rather than simply survive. Resilience is the ability to thrive even in the face of adversity. And actually, resilience is often built through coming through adversity and making it. So it's not about wrapping us all up and wrapping our children up in cotton wool and protecting them from everything. It's about giving them the inner strength and flexibility to meet the challenges that they're going to meet. I'll say more about that as we go. So the magic thing in this subject of safety and fear response is a part of our brain called the amygdala. Called the amygdala because it's a little almond-shaped piece of brain buried deep within our primitive brain. That's job is to act as a smoke alarm, to scan for threat with two particular questions. Am I safe? Do I matter? You might say, am I safe? Do I belong? Am I loved? Now, of course, the amygdala doesn't have words or thoughts, but if we were to understand what it's searching for, that's a really good way of describing it. It's not just about physical safety, it's about the felt sense of belonging in our tribe, in our community. We need to know, for our healthy functioning and our healthy growth, that we're safe and loved. If the amygdala gets the answer yes to that question as it's scanning our environment 50 times a second, if it gets the answer yes, then we have the capacity to grow our brains from tiny, as we are babies, toddlers, as we grow up, but also as adults, as we function healthily. The answer yes allows the amygdala just to keep scanning, a bit like your smoke alarm in your kitchen. You don't notice it if you're not burning toast or if your house isn't on fire. It just sits there. Same with the amygdala. However, if it senses threat, if anything threatens that idea of safety and belonging, then the amygdala, like the smoke alarm, sets off an unignorable panic situation. What that means in our body is that we move into what many of us know as a fight or flight response. It's more complex than that, but that's enough to know for now, for the purposes of today. We move into, if we feel that we're not safe and we feel we don't matter, we move into a state of searching for safety and either going into an aggressive fight or a flight, running away, avoiding. If those don't work, then we'll go into freeze or even faint, collapse. There's a whole spectrum of it. But the point is, while we're in that, as children we're not available to grow our brains healthily, and as adults we're not available to get on with our lives functionally. Now, I've got a couple of images for you of how we can understand that. One is about imagining that our life has a soundtrack. So imagine the soundtrack of your everyday life. And the image I've got here is of a computer. So imagine your computer's got your music library in it. Imagine your child or someone else as being the Bluetooth speaker connected to that computer. If we're thinking about babies growing and children, then it's like the Bluetooth speaker gets its music from the music library it's connected to. There's a very specific pairing. If this computer is playing something really loud and frightening or menacing, then that's the music that's going to come out of the speaker. If the computer's playing something calming, happy, relaxing, that's the music that's going to come out of the speaker. Now, obviously, as children grow, that image stops working because children develop their own music library, to stay in that metaphor. But the point is that the parent's soundtrack is what shapes the child's. A child growing up will have the same music library as their parents. And so it's so it's important that what's going on in the parents' soundtrack. So just to move on to a different image, here's a picture. The red bit is where the amygdala lives in the brain. Now, how do we experience safety and nurturing? It's in our environment, but as we grow up, if we've had enough of it from our parents, we become able to regulate our stress, regulate our alarm. If we haven't had enough of it from our parents, that becomes a very vulnerable process. So just to say something else about that, a really helpful model to understand how this works is from Daniel Siegel, who describes the hand model of the brain. And to put it simply, the thumb and the bottom half of the brain, the palm and heel of the hand, represent what he calls the downstairs brain. So the amygdala lives in this downstairs brain. And this downstairs brain is we can understand it a little bit if you imagine the toddler brain, that level of brain development. It's all about safety and bodily functions, our life states, and security and survival. It's all about that there. The upstairs brain is where we have all the sophisticated stuff. Our ability to manage relationships and emotions with some nuance, our ability to think, to remember, to anticipate, our ability to manage our own behaviour, our ability to risk assess and think about what we're going to do, to manage our impulse, our ability to be very able to have good relationship skills, to have subtle ways of recognising other people's needs, so the foundation of empathy. So these are very sophisticated, and they live in our upstairs brain. So if you see our upstairs brain, or our cortex, it snuggles around our downstairs brain. You can see that all of this surface area is linked with neural connections to our lower brain, our downstairs brain, so that when we're able to operate with our whole brain, our upstairs brain, or our cortex, is able to regulate us and manage us. That's what we want, is to be going out in the world with an integrated brain. Now, the picture here describes the process of when we flip our lids. When the amygdala gets this message of I'm not safe, I don't matter, what happens is if our lid flips, not literally on a hinge, but literally as in where the oxygenated blood flow goes. So literally connections with our upstairs brain are severed temporarily, hopefully temporarily. And what happens is when that lid flips, we suddenly no longer have access to all that stuff that I just said that's so useful to us in terms of how we manage and regulate ourselves in the world. And we are being managed by our downstairs brain, which has just got a smoke alarm going off going, how do I get safe? How do I get safe? How do I know I'm loved? Where's the love? And we live to, this is a state of alarm. Now the roots of resilience are not about how we keep the lid on, because we're always going to meet alarming situations. The roots of resilience is how strong this hinge is. So how do we get a strong hinge? If you're interested in looking this up further, this information is in a whole piece of research called polyvagal theory. You can easily look that up, there's so much information about it, just if you want to know and find out more. So the way that we grow that strong hinge, or that strong resilience, our ability to put our lid back on, is through our early parenting. So if I'm, as a baby, alarmed, and my parent meets me with calm, and she or he regulates themselves so that they calm down, then I can calm down. And the more that happens, the more I'm met with all my need for survival and my not understanding the world, the more I'm met with an enclosing safety, the more I'm able to build those networks myself, so that I become able to regulate myself. I'm able to then bring back my thinking, my behaviour management, my risk assessment, my choices, my sociability, my emotional intelligence. And isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we all want for our children? Isn't that what we want for our children? And that will last them their whole lives. That's the point here. Is that when we get it as near right as possible, because we're never going to get it perfectly. And actually, research that's really comforted me is that the important thing isn't how often that Bluetooth connection is disrupted. It isn't about how many times we get it wrong. It's about how many times we repair that. That's the important thing. We can get it wrong over and over, and we will. But how do we attend to repairing it? Yes, heartfelt yes, we get it wrong. Yeah. Has anybody here tried to be the perfect parent? It's hopeless, isn't it? It's hopeless. And why is it hopeless? I mean, I think there are 3 reasons. One is we often don't have enough information about what the important thing's for. The second reason is we often don't have enough support to be doing what we need to do. And thirdly, our poor old brains that were built in our early childhood may not have had enough of this responsiveness, because we've grown up in a culture that doesn't, most of us anyway, many of us have grown up in a culture that doesn't know the importance of that early safety and how big it is. Okay, so the impact of calm and alarm. When we grow up with a largely calm soundtrack and with parents who are largely able to keep putting their lid back down, with that sort of resilience, we develop qualities which I've talked about already. Resilience, clear thinking, the capacity to care for others, creativity, emotional flexibility, relationship skills, and choice about how we behave. Now, if I think about what I want for our children facing the future and the citizens I want them to grow up to be, especially now that I know a lot more about the sort of future we might be facing, these are some of the qualities I want them to have. That's why I think this information is so important to us. If we grow up with a regular soundtrack of alarm, then we are going to have ongoing vulnerability and a deep patterning, which makes it very difficult for us to function healthily. Now, the good news here is the news of neuroplasticity. This is the research that's showing that our brains remain throughout our whole lives capable of changing and growing. We can learn to put that lid back on. It just takes a lot more effort and determination and repetition. But we can do that, and I think that's one of the biggest jobs ahead of us. And I would say that is radical climate change activism. To learn how to be useful people in the world to each other and to our children. Because we need to have it together. If we all go round in a total panic, nothing good is going to come. So for me, that's radical action. This is just a little bite-sized 3 things I'd like to offer that are just every day that you can do while you're shopping or managing or whatever. And there are lots and lots more where these come from. But just 3 self-regulation tools, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. One is about grounding. So for many people, because we have such a relationship with nature, and because that is the heart of our despair about climate change, to connect with nature as much as we can, even when we're not in it, is valuable on many levels. So one, and I invite you to just imagine it now, is to feel rooted in the ground, sitting or standing, feeling rooted, feeling your feet, imagining roots going down through the earth. I like to think of trees as the people who stand still. There's a slowness, a steadiness, a seasonal robustness. So imagining your roots going down, and imagine your branches reaching up and taking in the sunlight, the air, the rain. The rain trickles into the roots. This is a beautiful cycle of nature. And as we know, trees are so precious to our life. And that's not a metaphor, literally they are. And this is a lovely exercise to offer our children, because it's so easy to do and so obvious. It's such an obvious story. Now, at the same time, or as a different thing, I would also like to offer you a practice of putting one hand on your belly and one hand on your heart. Now, there's, again, back to the neuroscience, there's some really exciting research about the very dense neural networks we have in our heart area and in our gut, so that people are talking about the 3 hearts, sorry, the 3 brains. We have 3 brains in our body, And so to give our attention to the brains that have less attention than the other can be really helpful. But also this matches that I'm safe, so a gut sense of I am safe, and in my heart I matter can be a really helpful. I mean, you can spend an hour doing this every day, or you can spend 10 seconds whenever you remember. One of my favourite teachers on neuroplasticity, Rick Hansen, he offers a practice of spending 12 seconds of taking in the good. And so if you do that for 12 seconds, you can know every time you do it, you're making neural connections that will support your resilience. And the last thing, the third thing that I want to offer today is just a reminder about gratitude. So much research at the moment on gratitude and how it puts us into a frame of mind that builds resilience, that builds capacity, and reminds us of our deep connection with the gift of life. To appreciate it can really bolster, especially in the face of relentless bad news and relentless information. We're the first people in human history that actually don't know about the continuation of our survival even. It's a big thing to face, and we need all the help we can get. And gratitude seems like a hippie flaky thing in the face of that, but it's actually radical practice. Okay, so just to make some suggestions in a way to summarise what I'm saying, I believe that as parents and adults in the community of the village around children, that if we prioritise our own stress regulation, we become immensely of use to our children's growing resilience. And I want to make the point that we are all bringing our history of trauma or stress to our lives every day. And that's one of the reasons why some people are able to respond to the call for action with action. And they'll just go for it, and they have the support and robustness to go and do that. And some of us quake in fear, wake up in the middle of the night, terrified. We don't have to all be the same. And I think if we can find a map of our own trauma history, we don't have to know the details, but we just need to know, if I feel vulnerable around this, I need to take care of that, and it's okay. I don't have to be like everybody else. I think we really need to respect that. And also, I think, as a community, we need to be getting ready to emotionally support our out there activist friends, because they're going to be putting themselves in a very vulnerable position, and some of them will have trauma that will get triggered by that. So I think part of a community of activists to support the people coming back from the front line is as important as being on that front line. Including sending them regular messages and food and gratitude and encouragement. We can't underestimate that, because that's about feeling supported, about feeling safe and valued. They'll be protecting their nervous systems as they're doing that. So learning self-care practices, really building our community, nourishing strong connections with others. I've read lots of Facebook posts of people freaking out because they're trying to convince everybody at the school gate or everybody in their family that climate chaos is happening and we're all going to die, and can you just listen? And feeling completely depleted by the inability of people to take that on. And I get that, I've been there for sure, many of us have, but I would like to encourage us to really resource ourselves with like-minded people, join in with others, because that will strengthen us, and you can see why given what I've said. So support is essential, and seeing this as activism. It's not enough to fight the old system within the old system. We need to find new ways and new stories, and I believe that this neuroscience research is just shining a light on the path, because it basically is just confirming ancient wisdom that's been around a long time, but it's converting it into the language that the mainstream science, medical science community get, and so we can use it, so we can all share a language wherever we're coming from. And I believe that that is going to be a very strong part of the new story that we're going to have to embrace, and that will boost us. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to have a conversation with people sitting near you. There'll be a few of these conversations, and I'd love to encourage you to talk to different people that you don't know at each conversation, so you meet a few people, because the person that you've come with, your friend that you're sitting near, you can talk to them afterwards. So today's a chance to build that village a bit by talking to someone you don't know. So these are some suggested questions about your own safety. What do you do to feel safe? What do you feel to do to feel connected and that you matter? And what support do you have around you? You might have a completely different thing you want to talk about, so that's fine, of course. But let's take so it's just over 5 minutes, like 7 or 8 minutes, if that's all right, to find someone to talk to. Thank you. So the second section I want to talk about is communicating with children about climate change. Because this seems really vital to me. There's a lot of information around, there's a lot of adults processing new things, and we already live in a culture that isn't very careful about what we expose children to in terms of written language, in terms of what they hear. So this is one of my things anyway, and it's been amplified in a way by this new surge in information and activism in response. So I'm going to look at different age stages. Generally, I think we need, as adults, to have a fairly fierce protection around news and communication. I think we need that for ourselves, actually. Television news is amazingly sensationalist. Written and radio news is ongoingly negative and alarmist. And I don't mean we shouldn't ever listen to it, but I think we just need to recognise the impact that has on us. But I'm very concerned about the impact that has on children who have a much different way of understanding than we do, obviously depending on their stage of development. So I want to think about age appropriateness. But it's not just about age, it's about, because not all 10-year-olds are the same, not all 15-year-olds are the same. So we need to know our own children and know what it is that they are able to understand and deal with. So it doesn't work just say this stage, but to help us understand the sort of time of life I'm referring to, I'm going to talk about age stages, but just want to make it clear that I'm talking about actually it's really developmental stages and obviously children are different from each other. And I also want to really remind us of the importance of where we get information from is crucial in terms of how we trust it, how we respond to it, how we can ask more. So we need to play a big part in that. Those of us who are parents or the aunts and uncles, grandparents of the community, we need to hold a strong responsibility for how we look after our own response. I think I can see from and hear from what people are saying that there are some parents who are so frightened by the news that we're hearing that they're in a state of alarm and that they're then trying to come from that place to talk to their children. And that's why, again, I say I think it's important that we look after our own responses first and that we speak from a place of strength and confidence, which might mean we need support and thinking and time to gather that together. And for me, who tends to speak fairly unthinkingly sometimes, I'm sort of giving myself a new extra level of responsibility to mediate that. I think as adults we are in a job of mediating information. And so, but having said that, I want to have a look at different age stages. So babyhood, 0 to 3. I mean that's a huge, each of these is a huge range. But looking at that very early time, as I've said, the most important thing at this age is that a growing baby feels I'm safe and I matter. It's that downstairs part of the brain that is developing at this time in these years, and that is going to be the foundation for the rest of their lives. So it's really worth prioritising nurturing safety, and in order to be able to offer that, the parent who's offering it needs to be in a state of calm as much as possible. I don't want to give us all an impossible task. But if we're trying to work out what our priorities are, there it is. Even though next Saturday's march or rebellion feels urgently important, the lasting effect and the investment for a future that works for all of us is more likely to be met if parents of 0 to 3-year-olds are focusing and prioritising keeping their little ones safe. And because, as I'll say later, this is the foundation of a child that's going to be one of the activists of the future. Now, one of the messages we get often is that if we know how important that early parenting is, and then our child grows up with problems, that we can all safely say that's obviously the parent's fault. And if we're not careful, we could use this scientific research that parents are so important in those early years to feel very justified in that blame. But it's really important to say that that same research is very clear that as adults, we are not independent, we are not resourced to parent children by ourselves. And I don't mean just solo, I mean in couples. We've evolved to need huge and lengthy care. That's the condition of being a human. We've evolved to need huge and lengthy care from a whole village, from a whole tribe, a whole community. So at this age, if we've got babies up to 3-year-olds, we also need great support from our community. And if we have older children or we don't have children, then I would like us to see ourselves as that community supporting the ones with the babies. So it's not just our responsibility to look after our own children or our friends, it's our responsibility to provide an environment, because our state isn't providing that for us, our culture isn't offering that. We've come a long way, and isolation is a very, very big vulnerability factor. So another route to activism, if you're looking for one, is to provide the support and community for the little ones growing up. That's our investment in their healthy functioning for the future. And as I said, this is the foundation of their strength of where they're going. I also want to say that there's a hormonal shift in parents of babies that happens when this is about women and men. There's a hormonal experience that happens when you are in charge of the life of a little one. It's a rise in oxytocin, which basically has the effect of putting your heart from inside your body onto the outside. That's what it feels like. And some of you will know this very well from the experience, is that you have an increased vulnerability to outside. It's like an increased sensitivity to threat because of the need to protect your little one. So I have a strong concern for parents of little ones who are going to be really affected by the information about climate change and really want to do something for their children growing up, and yet carrying that alarm at a time when they're so vulnerable themselves. So that's another reason why I would like us to give permission to parents of babies to snuggle up, and to find ways of activism that involve and include you, but don't threaten you as much as possible. And I'd like to offer an invitation to the rest of us to form a protective circle around them. Oh, that makes me cry. Fiercely important. We hold our parents, not just our children. We need to stop blaming them. Stop blaming them for their child in a cafe. We need to be holding them. So that's the baby stage. The next stage I'm looking at, again, it's a wide one, but I'm looking at young children, 3 to 7-ish. There's the need for safety and warm responsiveness is still there, but at this age, children are going to be a bit more out in the world, so their parents are still the foundation, but they're going to be more adults that they meet and other children that they meet. I just want to remind us all that at that age, our world is very small. We have no idea. We can look at polar bears in pictures and have a cuddly one, but we don't know what it means, the North Pole or the South Pole. We don't know the bigger picture. And so if we start at that age hearing language about what's happening to the world's rainforests and the world's oceans, that's very hard to imagine. This is a time of quite literal thinking, and actually older than this as well is quite literal. So do you remember, I don't know if you remember any experiences you've had as a child where somebody said something and you really took it to heart in a way that they didn't mean? An example for me is when I was about 7 or 8, I went to a wax museum where there was a model of a girl ill in bed. And I said to my mother, "What's the matter?" She said, "She has consumption." I said, "What's consumption?" She said, "Oh, it's an illness where you can't breathe." Now, obviously what she meant is breathing becomes very difficult, and she felt that she put that in child-friendly language. But what I understood is that she actually literally couldn't breathe. And I became terrified of this idea, and I remember lying in my bed feeling so frightened of this idea of what would happen if I just couldn't breathe, and I would hold my breath and imagine what that would be like, and it freaked me out. And many people I've spoken to have images of memories of lying terrified in their beds because of things they heard about nuclear war. A lot of us grew up in the age of nuclear terror. And what I want to say is that young children don't have the brain capacity to do anything with that, apart from feel helpless and powerless. So at this age, we need to be not talking about climate change. We need to be talking about nature in our back garden, in our local woods. We need to be connecting children with the earth that they love right by them. And we need to be helping them protect the worm that they collect or the butterfly they want to chase. So at this age, there's such a strong connection with nature. And this is the root of a lifelong love of nature, of the world. And isn't that the foundation of earth activism? So at this age, the activism here is to be doing things in the outdoors with our children, not just sending them off to some nice thing, but for that to be in our relationship with them and around the communities that we build with other parents, or the things that we offer. Let's do it in nature. This is also a very strong time for building emotional landscape. So the more that we offer empathic, warm responsiveness to care for the children, for whatever their emotional experience is, to feed that back to them, then we're developing a strong capacity for relationship and a strong capacity for emotional resilience, which again I believe is something we're really going to need a lot of. And many of us haven't grown up with those skills. So we need to work a bit hard at that. We don't often bump into deep resonant empathy in our daily lives unless we're really fortunate and make quite an effort for that. Or marry the right person. Play here is also strong. 3 to 7, children need to be playing. Playing and playing and playing, because that's how they learn, that's how they grow all these skills, and that's what is their work. That's their work. So whatever we're doing with them, it needs to have a playful element. And when we're faced with climate change, we might think we haven't got time with all this frivolous play, we need to be out there marching. Well, fine if there's marches that involve play, but that needs to be a central thing. And we'll come on to what I think of family-friendly activism. Play is one of the things that would involve. Also, I think at this age we need to be, children are in a phase of growing body autonomy. Their sense of, I'm in charge of my body, I can do this, I can do that, I can ride a bike, I can jump, I can climb. And I want us to be sticking up for children's say over their own bodies here. This is the roots of consent. Well, the roots of consent are much earlier, actually, but this is a strong time when those expectations get laid. And if we're bringing up our children to face a very uncertain future, then we want them to at least have the conviction of what the world that they live in their own body. Okay, so that's some of the things. I mean, there could be many more, and if we had long to talk about it, I know that everyone will come up with other ideas here. So looking at that older age, 7 to 14, again, this is a huge age, but this is a time of much more understanding, much more capacity to ask questions and find answers and learn and read, confidently reading the headlines in the newspapers, the sandwich boards outside newsagents with the shock headlines on, the banners at marches. This is a time where we're taking in information more, the written form much more. But we still need to be giving them the message, yeah, join in, what's your place? But the adults have got this. We need to be not expecting these children who have a lot more capacity. We need not to be saying, what are you going to do to save the earth? What are you going to do to save this planet? We need to be saying, we're doing everything. You're welcome to join in and we love your ideas. But the adults are still taking responsibility. I think this is an age that we can really encourage activism for things that matter to children as well, children. But again, it needs to come from them. What is it they're excited about? It might be their love of the trees across the road, or dolphins that they've seen pictures of or visited, or a place they've gone to. It needs to be really connected rather than abstract. Although at the upper end of this age limit, there's a lot more capacity for abstract thought, and therefore a lot more vulnerability to terror about that. Like at the upper end of this, you really get the sense of, oh my God, we could all die. That's a very frightening thing to live with at the most secure and best of times. So we need to be quite careful about what language we're using around this. And extra, because children in this age are much more out with their friends, especially the older range of this age, we need to, as adults, make sure we stay connected and stay protective. So we've still got that fierce protection ring around them, but it has a lot more space in it. Okay, again, I want us to be emphasising consent here. What are you wanting to do about this? Do you want to come on this march with me? Do you want to make this placard? What do you want? What do you want to think about this? Because when we get full of zeal, we want everybody to agree with us, and our children can be the first stop of that. But this is very important that we let them keep their own minds. And this is something that schools don't help with. That's in our schools we have a curriculum that children have to learn, and that's directly in opposition to consent. Yeah, so I think as parents and other adults, there's a lot of mending we need to do around children's feeling of consent of their own experience, because schools are sabotaging that every day. Okay, time for answering questions and having research at your fingertips. Yeah, Karen.
Jo, quick question. Are we still protecting, say, the 12-year-olds, for example, from media and information coming at them?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's a scary time being 12, yeah. What's happening neurologically is the front part of our upstairs brain that is in charge of how we deal with behaviour, how we assess risk and think and manage ourselves, is very flexible at this time, unstable even, because a lot of changes are happening there. And it's also a time of leaving childhood, but not yet being in adulthood, so they can seem feisty and strong and able to cope, but actually there's also a strong vulnerability there. Thank you for asking that. So, 14 plus, and again, it could be 13, 12 plus, or 15 or 16 plus, depends on the child we're talking about. Much greater ability, much greater capacity for understanding, but still not power in the world that they're in. They're still being told what to do by schools, by parents, by adults around. But as part of that change of adolescence, there's a much stronger capacity to do something different and want to fight and come up with new ideas and act. It's a real activism age. And I would suggest at this age, what we need to be doing as adults is encouraging those young people to find their contribution, not just drag them into ours. What is it that you want to do? What is it that matters to you? And how can I help you? How can I help you put that voice out? How can I help you stand up for yourself? Because when we stand up for ourselves, we can stand up for our environment and we can stand up for our planet. So really supporting our young people. And at this age, even more than before, we need the aunts, uncles and grandparents in the community to step in, because parents are rubbish when you're a teenager. We're hopeless, we don't know what to do. We need other adults who are role models and facilitators. So in Stroud, Piers Clifford has been camping on the green and attracted a lot of teenagers and young people there because he has this way of facilitating and inviting. He's respectful of other people's voices and respectful of young people's voices, and we need adults like him to be vocalising that. And I think we need to be supporting teenagers for the action they want to do. So for example, teenagers who are going on a school strike. It would be very easy for us as parents to say, oh gosh, what about your education? And actually they've got a serious point that can wait. And what they're standing up for is more important to them, and that's their education. How to stand up in our society and have your voice heard and feel like your life is meaningful. So I would want all of us parents to be going, yeah, go for it. Don't force them. But if they've got an urge to do that, if they've got an urge towards disobedience and not doing what they're told, support them in it. That's a bit controversial. But I'll come on to even more of that in a minute. Okay. So children at this age, I don't think we need to be protecting them from media, but I think we need to be mediating it with them, helping them get critical thinking around it. Okay, this person said this, what do you think about that? Oh, interesting that 5 bridges were blocked and there's nothing on the front pages of all the newspapers. I wonder what's going on there. You know, some critical thinking about media that children are given. And of course, you know, there's so many different views available online, so some help with finding the appropriate places for information. And again, as I've said, at each stage, encouraging autonomy and consent. Really vital. Consent often gets talked about as a sort of sex issue, but consent is throughout our whole lives. How can we expect anyone to feel they have consent of their own body in a relationship when they've grown up with their body being controlled by adults all the time? We have to build these in. Okay. So, lots more to say, but that's enough for now. I want to invite you to go and find someone else to talk to, and these are some questions I'd suggest. So what are the children in your life that you're supporting, your own or other people's, the children in your community? And what do you see them? Maybe think about a particular child or two, and what do you see them needing, and their priorities and interests. And again, if something else is bubbling in you, of course, talk about that instead. Okay. So the next section I'd like to talk about is involving children in activism. Now, I don't have loads of experience of this, and I don't feel myself to be an authority, but I do have some ideas based on what I've been learning and seeing and taking part in. So I'm going to share some of those with you, knowing that it's part of all of us learning and building a better picture of how we do this. So I'm going to talk about how we can organise action that is family friendly, that means that young children are welcome to be there and will get something from it and will not be harmed by it. And I'm also going to talk about how we might involve older young people, although I have said something about that already. So I'm very fortunate that this talk is coming at a time when we've recently had some fantastic events in Stroud that we can learn from and think about, and more to come. So if we're wanting to involve children in what I'm calling for the moment adult activism, so I'm meaning things like the Rebellion Days in London, big events that adults are planning, and we're thinking, can we go with our children? How's that going to work? I want to say something about that, how we make the decision whether to go or not, and if we are going, how we make that as safe and useful as possible for our children. So I read something on the Extinction Rebellion page on Facebook about adults taking part in action, and it stressed the need for adults of informed consent, that you know what you're getting yourself into, you know what you would do that might put you at risk or deliberately choose to be arrested, that you know what it's like if you are taken into custody, that you know what the legal process is. And there's been a huge amount of work around helping adults have informed consent about how they join in the rebellion. So I would like to extend that right to children, and that urgency to children, is we need to work out how we get the children that we're involving, how do we get their informed consent? We're not just going on a jolly, come with us, we're going to do something fun, and it's so important that I'm there, I've got no childcare, you just have to come. For me, that's not responsible enough. We need to be thinking, how does my child opt into this? And how do I, given that I don't know how it's all going to be, but given that I do know a lot more than they do, how do I help them think through what they're saying yes to? What are the risks? What are the scary things that might happen? And out of that, we need a plan, the safety plan. What if we get separated? What if you're scared? What if it all gets overwhelming for you? What are the plans that the organisers have made? Where is the safest place going to be? Who can we talk to if we're worried? We need to do all that research. The adults need to do that research so that we involve children safely. When we're there with children, and I'm talking about any age really, we need to keep close and calm. I don't mean like we just have to be completely chilled out all day. We can get excited and lively, What I mean is a calm nervous system where our amygdala isn't sending us into fight or flight. So calm can include lively. I just mean stress regulated, if you want to be technical about it, that we're able to regulate our stress. And if we start getting freaked out by being there, then we need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our children. I want to be very strong about that. Because of what I've said about the children's vulnerability. Yeah.
And just something about this high adrenaline environment.
Yeah.
How do you understand that in terms of like regulating and staying calm in high adrenaline environment?
Yeah. So the high adrenaline might be excitement and togetherness and love and look what we can do, and doing things that we don't normally do, like sit on a bridge. So high adrenaline can be really inclusive, but it can also move into threat. So I suppose what I mean is the adults need to be in themselves, centred enough to notice where that shifts or where that's different. I'm not thinking that this is really easy, because the nature of humans in groups, is that we all connect with each other's emotional states. So being part of a big group, you're not in charge of your own emotional state. And I want us to remember that for children that's even more the case. And I also suggest that we have a basic viewpoint that sorting out this mess is the adult's responsibility, and that we don't use children to make that happen. And it would be very easy to do that because they're beautiful and playful and innocent. And I read something, for example, on one of the discussions about the Rebellion Day. Oh, it'd be lovely if bring children, because that'd be so nice for everyone else. Well, that's true. That's true. The presence of children, for many people, makes the thing a whole lot safer. But for me, that's a little bit like using them as a human shield, and I don't want us to do that. If we can create something safe enough to invite them into so that they get care and respect. And again, I want to remind us that we're living in a society that doesn't have a lot of insight into children's experience and needs. So it could easily be tricky. For example, you might have well, in London I understand, and I wasn't there, so this is what I've learned from researching it, is that there was one bridge which was particularly where families gathered, and there was a beautiful atmosphere of inclusion and children able to play. And on that bridge there were people speaking through very loud microphones, very emotionally heightened, angry information that for the adults was rousing, but I wonder how the children heard that. So I don't know, like I said, I wasn't there, I'm not criticising that, it's just that's a sort of example of something we need to be aware of. So another action that happened where children were invited included a roadblock. This was in Stroud, a roadblock where drivers got furiously angry. There was quite a lot of aggression, but even from the activist side, there was somebody shouting the rebellion declaration through a megaphone, which is hugely important for the adults, but for children to hear that, it's very strong language and very frightening. And that's the idea. The language is designed to wake us all up and do something. But I don't think children need to be hearing that, to be honest. So how do we navigate that? It's a very tricky issue.
I think, off the back of that, so I've got 2 young children, 7 and 8, and so we've been quite involved with Extinction Rebellion with my husband's set up an affinity group. So it's flagged up a lot of these questions for myself.
Yeah.
In terms of their exposure to it, and I think kind of as in London on Saturday, we made a choice we didn't take the children, but obviously by the fact that we went, there was conversations with the children about that. I guess kind of all of what you're saying, I think, is always asking yourself the question how you feel and react in stressful situations. And
yes.
I think that was the thing that I kept kind of coming back to, was actually even going to London with children is a thing in itself. Actually add another layer of this, And I think kind of that was my benchmark all the time, was how do I react? Because like you say, that then feeds to the children.
Yes.
And I think just by experiencing the day without my children there, I was very glad that they weren't there. I had been very decisive in how my role was. It was on a well-being role, and I wasn't going to put myself in a situation of being arrested. But I think even on that, because it is a very large thing that's happening, and because there's unpredictability in it, and there was definitely there was a very different vibe on different bridges, and a very different reaction in how the police handled some of the bridges. And you could see the police were constantly regrouping and deciding how they were going to react. And on the bridge we were on, there weren't any arrests, but there was always that shifting. And I think the basic thing of it is yourself. How, in an unpredictable situation like that, would I react and how would I be? I think is probably how then you benchmark with your children. I think is vital.
Thank you. That's a great perspective from the experience.
Yeah, and I could feel, there was times, just even the outset of coming onto the bridges of, you are breaking the law, the police are there. I could feel my internal stress. Had my children been even just holding my hand, they would have known instantly that was not okay. And I know my eldest, who he's a rules child all over. I park in the wrong place and he's just like, oh, no.
Absolutely.
And I could see, had that been, my communication would not have been, this is okay,
yes,
I am okay. So I think, I think you can kind of just, it is all about being true to yourself. And I think because my husband very heavily involved with it and has taken the line that he's prepared to be arrested, it flagged up that kind of, where am I in this?
Yeah, then in order to support that, you need to be really anchored.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you. I think what you just said about that, the subtlety with which children are tuned into us, simply holding your hand, your children would have felt your alarm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. They are so tuned into us.
Yeah.
So just something in the change of your temperature or your grip or your response time.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to know. We need to all be very, really aware of that.
I find that really helpful to think about just for life in general, not
yes.
just
Thank you.
Yeah, life in general, definitely. Yeah, I mean, this is all about life in general. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going to talk much about this, but I just want to alert you to this beautiful model from Joanna Macy of a model of activism, active hope. And one of the videos I made before this talk, I'll talk in more detail about it, so I won't talk much now, but just wanting you to know that there are many ways of activism, and what Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston, who developed this model with her, they talk about a spiral that has 4 stages, that is deeply rooted in gratitude, and from gratitude is able to honour and find ways in our community of honouring the very painful feelings that come from our love of the earth and what we're seeing happening. And from that place we go on to see with new eyes and a new perspective about where we are in that story and what our new story might be. And from there it becomes clearer how we act. So I'd really encourage you to learn more about this and to find opportunities to learn this, because many people I'm hearing are saying, but what can I do? What can I do? And it seems to me that I'm saying today, well, be careful before you jump into the front line of all of it and put yourselves and your children in danger. Be careful about that. So the question then is, well, what can we usefully do? And my feeling is that this model is something that if we bring our children up to know it, so they don't have to learn it from scratch like we're having to, then that's going to really resource them for their future. So finding a child-friendly model of activism, for me, this is really it. And again, this is about every day, not just earth activism. Okay, so family-friendly activism. So I'm now talking about those of us who want to organise events that deliberately put children at the centre. what do they need to include? So I'd like to suggest that we really work hard to make the atmosphere positive, celebratory, lively, inclusive, playful. Music is massively helpful for this. It completely creates an environment that creates the soundtrack, the tone. Involving children at their level. What is it that you really care about? What is it that you want to say? What is it that you want to write on the placard? Consider the language in the signs and posters. I'd like to suggest if we're having a child-friendly activism, we don't read out the Rebellion Declaration. We don't have big banners that say we're fucked, as the one on the Westminster Bridge says. That we don't say humans are going to be extinct, that we don't have that language around children. We don't need to. The family-friendly protest, we can have leaflets which signpost adults towards more information. And again, I wouldn't make those really alarmist either, but I would say want to find out more and tell people where they can find out more. But it's a chance for building community, disrupting normal life, but not in a way that's dangerous to anybody. Okay, so again, if we're organising activism that includes children, ask them, what is it that you want to say about the world? Is it the dolphins that you love or the trees that you love? What's the message that you want to have for everybody? And really encourage that, because finding their voice where they are means that as they grow up, they will be able to use their voice for the things they get more and more sophisticated about. Don't give a child a placard that they can't read or that says, we're all doomed, wake up, sort yourself out. You know, we need to really engage them with things that are meaningful to them. And I would also like to suggest, I listened to Charles Eisenstein talking about climate, and he was talking about war thinking and how easy it is to just join in with that we're the goodies because we want to save the planet from the really horrible people who want to trash the planet. And I'd like to suggest with children that's not a helpful paradigm, that we need to start finding a different, more hopeful paradigm of connection and interdependence, that we're about making more friends and joining up more and more community rather than getting together with our gang and fighting the bad ones. That's an old story, very easy to jump into, and I think it's not going to, it increases the chances of fear in children for whom baddies and monsters are very, very scary.
Malcolm actually just said they're all for anyone.
Oh, for anyone, yeah, it's not just about children.
We're all feeling that fear.
Yeah.
Yes.
The people who can actually make the changes that really matter.
Yeah.
We want them to join in too.
Actually, do you know what? Everything I'm saying about children is actually about adults as well. It's just that if you say supporting adults in the face of climate change, we don't all get the immediate relevance. Children obviously need our help. But yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah, hello.
There's another question about breaking the law.
I know!
Rebellion's breaking the law. That's a great way to grab headlines, but is it appropriate to involve children in being anywhere near that? Maybe it is, but what it also does, it keeps it out of schools. Because it keeps it out of schools because of the way the government's working, the way that, the British values, which I think are probably Michael Gove's values, that we legally have to promote in school, we can get shut down at school if we are not promoting the rule of law.
I know. I know. Well, I've got some more to say about that in a minute, actually. Yeah. But as the point that you made, children are very worried about rules when they're younger. So that's something we need to think about. Somebody else is going to say, yeah.
Connected with that, what came up when you were talking, Zoe, was the whole role of the police and how children experience the police and what they represent in our society in terms of the structure and the holding and the safety and etc. of providing some kind of framework, and that certainly on some demos I've been on, that's been quite undermined, and the police are the enemy. And I'm not sure how much I would want children to hear that and to be in that and to lose that structure at such a young age. I think it's well worth questioning as adults, but to lose that at a young age is quite... So where am I then?
Personally, I'm a lawyer, and my kids have been on marches and demos since they were tiny, and when I've talked to them about breaking the law, or other people's kids, it's a discussion about what laws are, who makes them, some laws are different to other laws. So I've been a criminal prosecutor, I've been a criminal defence attorney, I've worked in the civil arena. But it's a kind of gentle discussion about law and who makes laws and what are they for.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful, thank you. I'm going to move on, because I want to show you some photos of some activism in Stroud, just in the last week. So this was from a gathering, I've got a few photographs of the gathering on the green, you know, where Piers' camp is, and there was a huge Stroud on strike event, and I want to show you some pictures of how they made that family friendly. So it's right next to a roundabout, and there's a wall here. Mostly the children stayed behind the wall or on the wall. I think they just came forward for a photo. But it was on quite a busy roundabout, and there was a whole row of children with placards that they'd made, and people were reading them and bibbing and bibbing and bibbing their horns. And it was so exciting, because the children were sort of experiencing this great impact of what they were doing and response to messages. And that became like the centre of the thing, the sort of row of children. And there was an excitement. Other children were coming home from school and joining in, or going what's that about, or laughing, and the drivers were waving. It caused a big stir. So that was disruption to the normal way of things, but it wasn't stopping anybody from doing something. So the children didn't experience any backlash about that. They weren't standing in the road with those, they were standing next to it. So they experienced the world being very different from normally on a Friday afternoon, and themselves as hugely influential and powerful. And there were all ages there, so they experienced themselves in a community with adults right behind them and with them. Here's children of different ages planting trees in a place where we weren't given permission to plant trees. So that's a good example of rule breaking. What's the sort of rules and when might you break them? So a bit of civil disobedience, but not one that anyone's going to get really cross about, hopefully. But how empowering to dig a hole in a bit of land that nobody ever usually goes on and plant a tree as part of that activism. There was a big soup kitchen as part of it, so welcoming and nourishing, and people brought things and got together. And I love that picture of the range of ages involved in this. This was an ongoing through-the-week activism that was around Remembrance Day. Piers gave everyone a pattern for how to make different coloured poppies, and people gradually came and created a garden that became a visual thing that all the cars, every time they drove past that week, they were seeing this growing garden. And beautifully easy to make. And throughout the week, families with children were visiting and making some poppies. People without children were visiting and making some poppies. And I think my point is that when I say family-friendly activism, what I want is that to be community activism that doesn't leave out children. We have too much segregation of this is a children's thing and this is an adult's thing. So this is a community thing, but we need it's organised bearing in mind the needs of the children and therefore the needs of the children in the adults. And that's Piers' car that he painted and was the centrepiece message. So this is some young men getting involved in tree planting. I saw some of that out. And Piers provided activities that young people could get involved with. So there's some young people whittling the sticks. So it becomes a central focus. A piece of land that is never usually used, people just drive around it, becomes the hub of resourcefulness, of learning new things, of eating together, community gathering, and it creates a stir because the people driving past on their normal after-school pick-up drive see it happening. So it gives out messages to the town, to the people. Something important is happening. So this is the next day, a big community action march in Stroud to support the Extinction Rebellion event in London, and this was again designed by people really holding children at heart. So a big gathering, and look again, it's not just about children and their parents. Loads of people stood up, came forward and joined in. We decorated umbrellas, people dressed up as animals or dressed up in their finery and made a big deal out of it, and singing was at the heart of it. So we had a community singing leader who came along and taught songs and gathered everyone singing, and this is in the middle of the high street. So again, it was disruptive, But it didn't stop anybody from going about their business. It just made life very different on that day. Anyone just going about their business would have seen a huge crowd of people in the middle of the high street, adults surrounding children in the middle and all singing. And this beautiful ceremony at the heart of it, where an elder in our community hands over a model of the earth to the children. As we're singing a song, we hold you in our circle, we hold you in our love. Many tears were shed, and people's hearts were opened. People saw a new possibility. We were offering them a whole different way of seeing a Saturday in town and a way of living. Hold you in our circle. Hold you in our love. Hold you in our circle. Hold you in our love. Hold you in our circle. Hold you in our love. Hold you in our circle. Hold you in our love. So that's the, I don't know if you got a glimpse of that song, Tender. And I met a man who isn't a parent, who got swept up in that because he was actually trying to go to something else that day. But all his friends that he was doing that with suddenly said, oh, we're all going on this march. So he was a bit put out, but he thought, oh, well, okay. And he said to me afterwards that that moment was the moment for him where something just changed in him and he got what we were all doing. He got the importance of our earth. As he watched the elder hand that over to the children. So ritual and symbol is so powerful for all of us. We need that for our hearts to be in this. And that day later, another older woman in our community she saw me and rushed over to say to me, thank you so much for that. She said, I've been fighting for so many years. She's been an activist for so many years. And she said, to me, it was such a beautiful moment to see all those young people there and that image of involving them and seeing that us handing over the future to them. So this goes deep, you know, it's a way of consoling ourselves that change is possible and supporting not just the children, but the whole community and knowing that we're not alone and you weren't fighting for nothing. That we're taking up this love and the need to protect our earth. The importance of consent. I'm saying a lot about consent because I believe one of the reasons we're in this mess is because because our consent has been overridden again and again and again, leaving us unsure about what authority we have in the world, unsure about what we're safe to do. And I think it's the heart of human health is autonomy and the ability to make our own boundaries. And we very easily cross that with children because it's in our culture everywhere. So we're listening and encouraging children and involving them, but we're also staying knowing that we are the ones regulating and mediating the stress and the environment and the alarm. Okay, so because we had quite a lot of, because of what's happening with time, and because we had some different discussion, I'm going to miss out this bit of group stuff because I want to get on to the last bit, which is about building resilience for an uncertain future. Because this is a really important part of what I want to say, is that I want to say that the activism and the now and the urgency is one thing, but I want to say really strongly that the way we parent our children now is radical activism. So I hope I'm going to tell you why I think that. We know that we don't know what the future holds. Whether we go with the most alarming predictions or whether we go with the less alarming predictions, we know that the future will be different for our children and unlike anything that we've seen. What we're hoping is the future is going to be different because it's going to be so much better. because we are going to find ways of gathering, finding a new story and involving them in that. But we're facing threat and we're facing turmoil. So we know that the future is uncertain. How do we help our children cope with that? Well, one of the ways is by doing everything we can to change things around now when we've still got time. And we've talked about that. But now I want to talk about how we actually equip our children to deal with this uncertain future and to play a strong contribution in it. So reminding you of what I said at the beginning, that the heart of resilience is about warm, responsive care, respect and autonomy, and about the care, the self-care of the adults around the child. That's the heart of resilience that we grow in children. Now, parenting as activism. We have, at the moment, a culture that is fixated on obedience. Really, that obedience is required from children at every level. And that's one of the reasons that Extinction Rebellion is so exciting and so frightening, because we were being invited to be disobedient. And we've all grown up being expected to keep the law and being either frightened of or rebellious against authority. So when we use punishment and reward, when we try and control others' behaviour by punishing them if they do what we don't want them to do, or rewarding them for doing what we do, we are teaching a sort of broken-spirited obedience that disables us, or disables the children we do that to be able to stand strong in the world and to have the confidence to change things and to play their part in that. Culture is rooted in childhood. Some research found that the strongest predictor in 2016 for support for Donald Trump was beliefs in authoritarian parenting. Some research found that people were much more likely to support him if they had been brought up in an authoritarian way. So believing that adults are in charge, specifically often the father in charge, that it doesn't matter why the rules are there, your job is to keep them, whatever. That sort of thinking is what leads towards vulnerability for society. So my view is that we create culture in the way that we look after our children. And although evolution takes hundreds of thousands of years, we can change a culture within a generation with the will and the determination, and a lot of adults who are willing to learn to do things differently. But it happens fast. We can change the experience for our children and make it different from our experience. So something more about how I'm seeing parenting as activism. And going back to the definition of resilience, is the ability to be flexible in the face of change and uncertainty, and the ability to connect healthily with others and recognise that our state of interbeing, that we are inevitably connected with each other. To be able to really live in that state is what resilience is all about. And what that comes with is resourcefulness, practical skills, and a feeling of power in our bodies, that I can make something happen, I can contribute here. Love of the earth is part of resilience. A lot of the problem we're in now is because of our separation, not just from each other, but from our earth, from the outdoors, from nature. The ability to regulate our stress system. I've already said, I hope I said it strongly enough, that our ability to regulate our own stress comes from our early experiences. Creativity and critical thinking. I made this list thinking, what is it that's going to equip our next generation to carry on the work of saving the planet or adapting to the new state of the planet? What are they going to need? So when we've identified what they need, we need to know how do we give that to them? So we're building their future abilities right now. And if we don't change, then things will carry on the same. So it's a big wake-up call, not just to get out there marching, but to seriously think about how we're parenting. For me, that's exhilarating. The chance to do something different that's going to create a better world. So we need a new paradigm around how we think about children. And when I say new, it's ancient as well. It's not actually new. It's just different for our culture. And luckily, the research, the support is all there. I'm not making this up. There's so much, and so many people who are already teaching this and practicing this. I'll give you some of the resources of places I've been learning from afterwards. So remembering the message, I'm safe, I matter. What children need is parenting that is warm, kind, responsive, engaged, supportive, robust and calm. When I say calm, I mean regulated. Calm and lively. Regulated. Managed. And how do we do that? Because that all sounds like, oh yeah, okay, I'll sign up for that. That sounds really cool. But it's not easy to do that because of what information we've got, what support we've got, and the brains we've got already. So thinking about things to avoid that are everywhere at the moment in our culture, we need to be avoiding punishment and reward as a way of controlling children's behaviour. And there are many things that many of us are taught to do at home with our families, things like time out and the naughty step and sticker charts. Well done for doing a poo on your potty, here's a sticker. We don't need to be doing that. And it's just the other side of punishing when children do things. It's coercive, and we need to stop it because it's all about controlling obedience and disabling people's sense of power in this world. That doesn't mean that we're going to have a whole generation of children that have got no idea about boundaries and just go around running riot. That's also an outdated view of children. It comes with that whole paradigm of thinking that children are inherently going to, give them an inch and they'll take a mile. That's a redundant narrative as far as I'm concerned. Actually, if we're brought up with responsive empathy, warmth, we want to cooperate, we want to contribute and join in, we want to link with others in healthy ways. Anyway, so punishment, reward, shaming, ignoring and obedience. And so I have a very big challenge for the school system here, because that is the heart of our education system.
Parenting, but most children spend so much time not with their parents in a system that's on the...
Yeah, so if you want another call to action, what do we do in the face of this? Okay, one thing is we completely change our education system, but in the shorter term, we stick up for our children in the face of it. Because the current narrative is that we're supposed to be supporting our children, supporting the school in the way that they deal with our children. No, we need to be sticking up for our child's needs for warmth and safety. So fine, if we need to send our children to school, many people in this community home educate for some of these reasons. It's not just about the curriculum, it's about the very nature of how children are treated. But we're not all in a position to do that, and I'm not suggesting that we should be. But what we can do is really support our children in seeing the story. Because then they'll learn, okay, this is how people get controlled. This is how people get ruled by fear. This is how it becomes really difficult for the child in the class who's always in detention and clearly has problems, all sorts, anything it could be. It could be stuff at home, or it could be the nature of their own needs. We're very different. Yes.
Sure, very quickly. I think we can also go into some of the schools here, whether it's Waldorf or conventional comprehensives, and sometimes they are receptive.
Yeah.
And just help support them too.
Yeah, and I work regularly in schools, and what I find is that there's many teachers, most teachers don't go in to school teaching because they want to do this, but the system is so strong that there'll always be somebody interested in changing. I want to be really clear, I'm not being really down on teachers. But I am saying that the system is looking to control children this way. And that's what most of us had, and that's why it's such a big thing to rebel, because we haven't been brought up for that. So let's not bring our children up with that same story that keeps them cowed and uncertain of themselves and feeling like they're bad people if they haven't met the milestones and the constant targeting and constant tests. So we need to be sticking up for them. Am I saying that strongly enough? So, yes, when we bring up children with this, obedience being the first thing, we bring up adults who are scared of authority or furious at authority, depending on which side they've managed to navigate themselves. Children who do what they're told or who make a point of having to fight and not do what they're told. It becomes a rebellion against it rather than a sense of strong personal power. Unable to resolve conflict because they haven't been given the skills for that, it's just do what I say. Vulnerable to fear, because that sort of mindset of obedience basically says that the people in charge know what they're doing. And once you realise, as many of us have come to realise, that the people in charge actually don't know what they're doing, that's a very frightening moment if you've been brought up to expect that the authorities have got our best interests at heart. And you bring up adults who think they can't change anything. Well, don't we recognise that? Don't we recognise those things? And wouldn't it be lovely if our children didn't have that experience? So my belief is we parent our children differently and they will get a whole different experience. Okay, so what that means in our families, inside the home, is that the parents or the adults living in the house are well resourced and supported, that there's a culture of respect for everyone, not an authority of we're in charge and you don't matter, a culture of gratitude and appreciation, love of the earth, which I keep saying I think is so important, and encouraging children's voices and ideas. Okay, well that sounds great, and I think probably most of us are doing our best for that. The challenge is when we are stressed, isn't it? And that's when we find ourselves shouting and being disrespectful. It's because we can't keep it together. We didn't have enough of it ourselves. Outside the home, I'm suggesting let's get radical about school. Tell them, to put our foot down. I want to be putting feet down for young children. About at 5, it is not acceptable to have homework. Those children need to be playing, cuddling, running around outside, climbing trees, not learning how to spell because. So we need to be putting our feet down because of things like that. And we need to be clear that we are on our child's team. No one else is going to stick up for them the way we can. That's our job. We're not there to be a long arm of the school, making sure that they do what the school tells them at home. We need to be strongly on their team and sticking up for them. Help them. Let's not buy it ourselves. Because a lot of us are so cowed by teachers because we haven't been back to school since we were there. And we sort of want to do, as we're told, let's support the school and support our children at the school. I'm not suggesting, part of me is suggesting, but what I'm saying is we don't all have to walk out. We can step in and say, I really care about my child's happiness and education. How can I help? Step in, not just rebel. Let's stop buying the obedience story and do what work we need to do on ourselves to find some comfort in some comfortable place with that. And getting involved in the community so that it's not just school and home, that we make a wider picture. Because at school, children are very much kept in very narrow age bands. And that's not a way to learn. And it's not a way to learn community and relationship. So we need to build strong communities so that evenings and weekends and holidays, there's a wide range of ages and a wide range of adults who are available. Yeah, so it's about living these values. We don't have to have them on a big sheet. These are British values, these are our values, these are the 5 school values. Live our values. And I really want to emphasise how much that is activism. I hope you can hear that, that's what I think. So, resilience, this is just a model I wanted to offer you of human ecology. Broffen, what's the name of the people? Broffen? Something I can't remember, I'll tell you one of the resources. Just reminding us that we're not alone, that when a child's needs are placed at the centre, resilience happens at every level. Actually, so does vulnerability. So part of what we want to be doing is building in resilience in our families, in our communities and schools, and in the wider world. So our campaigning for more funding for support for parents of babies, for example, is part of building that resilience. So I'm coming to the end now, and I just want to say, what do we do then? What am I suggesting that we all do? So I'm suggesting that we have a radical plan for looking after ourselves, to repair and strengthen our own neural networks that support our stress regulation, so that we can be a calming, regulated force in the world and in our families and in our communities, that we fiercely protect our children, that we build our communities of like-minded people. Let's not wear ourselves out trying to convert the people that aren't interested. Let's seek relationships that support us. Let's work out how to get help when we're alarmed. Let's find support of other people who aren't in that state and can help regulate us into calm again. Let's be confident that it isn't just blockading roads that is activism. There are many forms. There are many forms of activism within Extinction Rebellion, and there are many forms that can accompany it, that we can do alongside. And let's keep an eye on our resourcefulness so that we don't try and change the world from a place of exhaustion, depletion, sleep deprivation, loneliness. Let's attend to that so that the activism we do clearly contribute is well resourced and supportive of others. Okay, so that's my suggestion, and if we had more time, I'd invite you to make your own plan of action, because obviously our lives are all different, we have different needs.